Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Nernstorm and in this video I'm going to be showing you my Magicka Dragonknight PvP build for the Markarth patch. I've been playing this build ever since the AoE cooldowns were removed from Cyrodiil with the new patch in 1vx's and 2vx's, and it's been super enjoyable. It has great Magicka sustain, better than any MagDK build I've played in quite some time, good consistent pressure, and a great burst to top it off and even allow you to two-shot enemies if you catch them off guard. It has solid resistances that allow you to survive while outnumbered, and good enough mobility to allow you to kite Zergs when you're outnumbered and chased by too many players. This build has been a ton of fun to play on both the PTS and now the live server, and I've been looking forward to share it with you guys. So now, without further ado, let's get to the build itself, starting up with the stats. As you can see, our max Magicka is at 32k, 35k on the back bar for a little bit extra healing power. Our max health is at over 28k and our max stam at almost 17k. As for our recoveries, our Magicka recovery unbuffed is at 1k. However, with just the potion buff, we are able to get to 1300 Magicka recovery, even more on the back bar. Our health recovery is at 1200, which allows us to gain a lot of health even when we're not actively healing ourselves, and our stamina recovery at 900 allows us to have this little bit of extra for blocking, breaking free, or roll dodging, whatever we need to survive in those outnumbered scenarios. Our spell damage right now unbuffed is at 2200. However, as you will see in a second as I'll display it on the screen, our spell damage can buff up almost to 4k. In fact, we are lacking a few hundreds of spell damage because currently there's a bug where the Seething Fury procs by casting Ardent Flame abilities on your front bar. The spell damage you get from that is not currently shown on the stat sheet. I've already talked to ZeniMax about it. They have confirmed the bug and they have a fix coming up in the next patch, but until then our spell damage will be displayed a little bit shorter than what it is supposed to be at. Our spell critical is a bit low, as you can see. However, it doesn't change too much because we are using Markarth this patch. I will discuss that in a little bit when we get to our sets, but because of that, our spell critical is only really relevant for our healing power, and so it's not such a huge difference that it's not super high this patch, especially after the nerfs to spell critical that ZeniMax implemented in this patch. As for our resistances, if we just go to the back bar real quick and buff up, you can see that our spell resistance is at 31k and our physical resistance at 24k. However, we also get 3.6k more resistances from Bloodspawn, so our resistances are really high for a light armor build like the one we're using this patch. Our critical resistance is at 2500 right now, which in my opinion is just great for PvP in CP campaign, and our spell penetration is currently at almost 8k. However, we are also using Elemental Drain this patch on our front bar, so we have this 6k extra penetration, which allows us to have almost 14k spell pen, which helps us deal a lot of pressure to our enemies. As for our sets, this patch we are using, first of all, our trusty Bloodspawn. Ever since it was buffed again, Bloodspawn has been one of my favorite sets, like back in the old days. It is just the perfect match for Dragonites in my opinion. It gives you that extra ultimate generation, extra resistances, and a little bit more stamina recovery. So really great to help you with all the things you lack as Dragonite. Since you get a lot of power from your Battle Roar passive, ultimate generation is super important, and in my opinion, not using Bloodspawn is a huge loss on Dragonites. The next set we are using this patch is going to be Burning Spellweave. I love Burning Spellweave. I've been using it for years now. It is just a great set to use. We're only having it on the front bar and a different set on the back bar, but Burning Spellweave itself, after the changes it got in last patch, gives us 500 spell damage, is super reliable because it procs the moment we deal flame damage, which on a Dragonite is going to be instantly whenever we go offensive, sometimes even before, so we have the Burning Spellweave buff prepped up the moment we go for our burst, and it is up 8 seconds out of 12 every single time. The moment the 12 seconds are done, we start with the next 8 again, and then only 4 seconds cooldown in between those procs of 8 seconds. Really the best damage set that you can use for Magicka Dragoknights in my opinion. On the back bar, we are using Desert Rose this patch. Last patch I was using the Bloodthorn set on the back bar because it allowed me to get a lot of stamina back as well as Magicka. However, with the new changes to the tri-stat buffs that we get from our potions that give us a lot more stamina regen, I don't feel like I need that extra stamina anymore from Bloodthorn set, and so I'm using Desert Rose on the back bar. It is by far the set that gives you the most Magicka sustain. I have tested it thoroughly. Even with the new changes to Magicka recovery, Desert Rose is still miles above Lich and Warlock's performance. It gives you the best sustain that you can get from a one barable set, and we are only using Desert Rose on the back bar. So as long as we go to our back bar once every 4 or 5 seconds, we get a whole lot of Magicka out of it, which helps us sustain a whole lot. In addition to those sets, we are using one piece armor of the trainee, which gives us that little bit of extra max health because we have that one piece extra on our build. And of course, how can we not? We are using Markarth's Band of Brutality. I've been against this set for a long time and I'm still against it. I think the set is very, very imbalanced and I don't like using it on any of my builds. However, this patch, I really feel like you need to use it on pretty much every single build. On every class that is not crit oriented, there's really no reason to play with crits in PvP at the moment. ZeniMax nerfed, probably due to PvE reasoning, but they nerfed the CP passive that was in charge of critical chance by a whole lot, 2/3 of the value they've taken out, which makes our crit chance very, very low, even if you play with light armor with Major Prophecy on the front bar, which really makes Markarth so much better. It's like Markarth was already a huge competition to crit chance, and now crit chance is just, or critting in general as a strategy for your PvP build, is just in such a bad place that I don't feel like it's a good idea to use it whatsoever, and Markarth is really key on everything. And so even though I don't use any proc sets on my build, I am still using Markarth because the set is just so very powerful. We are using 5 pieces light armor on this setup and 2 pieces heavy. Light armor still allows us to sustain really well and gives us that extra penetration that we really want for an offensive build. And so we are using it even though we are using Markarth this patch. And now I'll go over every single one of my pieces so you guys can tell exactly what I am using in terms of enchantment and traits on every piece of my gear. Next up to our skills, starting up with the front bar, we are using Burning Embers. This is a great dot that we want to apply to our enemies, but more importantly, this is one of our biggest sources of heals in this build and in general on any MagDK build. The damage from Burning Embers also heals you 96% of it whenever the effect ends, and that doesn't only mean when the dot expires, it also means if you recast the skill on a target. So for example, you can apply Burning Embers to one or even multiple targets that you are fighting, and whenever you need that surge of heal without having to swap to your front bar, you just recast the skill again. And if you had like 6, 7 or even 10 seconds that this skill was chilling on an enemy while your damage is fairly high, you're going to end up getting a massive amount of heal back to you on the spot, sometimes a lot bigger than what Coagulating Blood would have given you instead if you cast it. So it is just a great skill for both the damage with the dot and the healing power that it provides you with. Next up, we're using Molten Whip. This is not our spammable on this build, and that is super important to remember. While a lot of Dragoknights use Lash, the other morph, as a spammable, Molten Whip is not a spammable skill. This is your delayed burst skill. You want to buff up your Molten Whip by stacking up to 3 ticks of Seething Fury that you get by casting your other Ardent Flame abilities, which are Burning Embers and Engulfing Flames on this bar. And then you are able, when you stacked up your Seething Fury procs to 3, you're able to lash out your Molten Whip and deal a massive amount of burst to an enemy. You can time it out together with your Fossilize for a big burst, or even with your Leap for an ultimate combo. There are so many times I was able to kill enemies with just a leap into a fully buffed Molten Whip. Just on the spot, 2 hits and enemies go down if they were squishy enough. A really deadly combo if played correctly. Next up, we have got Engulfing Flames. This is one of your best dots, and in all honesty, also you're spammable on this build. It applies a great dot to all enemies in front of you that deals damage to them over 14 seconds, and also allows you to deal up to 8% more damage to them. The value is always standing at 10% whenever you are buffed, even partially buffed on this build, so this is nothing to worry about. And you use it kind of as a spammable because you want to proc this 3 ticks of Seething Fury before you cast your Molten Whip. So you always want to go with maybe 1 or 2 Burning Embers and a bunch of Engulfing Flames, and whenever you're ready for that big burst, you deal out your Molten Whip and kill the enemy. Next up, we've got Fossilize. Fossilize is the second strongest CC in the game after Streak. It is an undodgeable, unblockable stun that both locks your enemies with the stun itself, and after they break free also roots them if they don't have immunity to roots and immobilizations at the moment. So it is very oppressive, it is very good because Dragonites do not have executes by default, and so Fossilize help you mitigate that. Whenever your enemies are low HP, this is when you want to cast your Fossilize, lock him down, and deal your final blows to kill the enemy completely. Very powerful skill, allows you to make sure the enemies do not dodge your Molten Whip or block your leap by just casting the Fossilize right before and right away, going with your big damage skills. Next up, we've got Elemental Drain. This skill got both nerfed and buffed this patch, but we are still using it. Overall, it is a fantastic skill. It gives us Major Breach, which reduces the enemy physical and spell resistance by 6k, so adds a lot to your penetration towards the enemy, and also gives you minor Magicka Steal on the enemy whenever you apply it. So basically, if you apply this and any of your dots to an enemy every single second while the debuff lasts, you are going to get more and more Magicka back. This is a great skill for both your offense and your sustain, and I definitely recommend using it and applying it to every single target that you are focusing. Last on the front bar, we are using Leap as our ultimate. There are really only 2 great choices for offensive ultimates on Dragonites. There are Leap and Standard. In my opinion, Standard or Banner is not really worth using at this point. Mobility is literally everywhere, and if you're using Standard as your main damage ultimate, you're just going to end up having enemies roll dodge or run away out of it. You have to chase them around, spam your Standard, and you don't get much done because it deals damage over time and not a direct damage burst, whereas Leap just deals the damage on the spot, a big massive amount of damage whenever you cast it. It is really, really powerful time together with Fossilize or Molten Whip or both in between the two. Really, really powerful. I very much recommend using it. In my opinion, Dragonite Standard is not worth using unless you're using Elfbane, and even then it is kind of meh, and any player with more than 2 brain cells is going to avoid your ultimate, so definitely I recommend using Leap. As for our back bar, we are using Meditate. This is our flex spot. You guys can really replace this with anything you want. I find Deep Thoughts or Meditate really, really effective to use. This is the last skill on the Sijik skill line, and it is just so powerful in terms of sustain. Whenever you are fighting in a 1v1, you don't really need it, but whenever you're fighting and kiting, let's say 5 or 6 or 10 enemies that are chasing you around, if you're able to take line of sight and then meditate for a few seconds, this can really give you that little bit of extra magic you need for a bit of healing, or that extra little bit of stamina for another roll dodge to get away from them, or another break free when they lock you down and all chase up on you. So Deep Thoughts is really powerful, but it is a flex spot and you can replace it with really anything you want. I also recommend trying out, and I have been experimenting with it a little bit, trying out Cauterize on the back bar. I've used this skill as Flames of Oblivion on the front bar instead of Engulfing Flame on my previous builds. This patch I'm able to use Engulfing Flames again on the front bar instead of Flames of Oblivion because we have so much sustain that I can afford it again like I did back in the old days. So now you're free to use Cauterize, the healing morph of the skill, and we can use it on the back bar instead of Deep Thoughts if that is something you are interested in for a little bit extra healing on the back bar. It also gives you that Major Prophecy for a little bit of extra healing power on the back bar as well. You don't need it on the front anyways because you have Markarth, but on the back bar it will allow you to have better healing power with coagulating blood as well. And so it's not a bad skill to use as well. I personally like Deep Thoughts better if I play solo when I'm very much outnumbered, but Cauterize is a great option as well. Next up, we are using Degeneration. This patch with the buff to the 3 regen buffs that you get from a Triostat potion, I really like using Triostat potions again. I feel like the amount of stamina that I get out of it is so relevant that I don't want to use spell power pots anymore, and so I'm using Degeneration on my build for the sake of having that extra major sorcery to have the 20% extra spell damage. It is really relevant to have, and I definitely recommend it. In addition, it also deals extra damage to your enemy in the form of another dot that you can stack with your other 2 dots on the front bar, so adds to your overall pressure. Next up, we're using Coagulating Blood, obviously the big heal for Magicka Dragonknight. The skill got a buff in terms of its healing output recently. However, in my opinion, it is still way too expensive to afford to use as your main source of healing. So I still recommend playing smart with a lot of Burning Embers on your targets as your main primary heal. But Coagulating Blood still remains a very powerful oh shit button when you're taking a lot of damage from enemies. Maybe you got sniped or ganked or anything of the sort, and you don't have Burning Embers applied to enemies to cash up, then you use Coagulating Blood instead to get a bunch of health, especially when you're low. But once again, I do not recommend spamming this skill. If you spam it, you're gonna run out of Magicka really fast, no matter how much sustain you have on your Magicka Dragonknight build. Next up, we are using Race Against Time. This is a great skill for the sake of our mobility. I do not recommend using Vamprism on MagDK right now because Vamprism just costs so much resources because of how they redesigned the Vampire class during Greymore, or the Vampire skill line during Greymore. I don't recommend running Vamprism. I like it on different classes. I don't find it the appropriate fit on a MagDK where all your skills are already super expensive, and so I'm using Race Against Time instead. It gives us that movement speed as well as our immunity to snares and immobilizations. Yes, Minor Force does not give us anything really because our critical damage is non-existent with Markarth. However, the speed as well as the immunity to snares and roots that we get from this skill are worth running, despite the fact we are using Markarth on this build, in my opinion. The last active ability is going to be Volatile Armor. This is just this skill that gives us our Major Resolve, which gives us our physical and spell resistance up by 6k. Definitely relevant, definitely important to run Major Resolve on any build you play, no matter what, and this is the best form of Major Resolve you can get on a Dragonknight. It also gives you some damage around you when you activate it that can expose Stealthing Nightblaze, as well as damage return to enemies that attack you in melee range. So it is a great skill to use, and I definitely recommend it. And our ultimate on the back bar is Temporal Guard. This is Undo, the ultimate of the Sijek skill line, and I am using it just for the minor protection, which reduces our damage taken by 5%. This has been nerfed from 8% in the previous patch, but is still worth running in my opinion. I almost never cast this skill. I mainly use my leap both offensively and defensively. Temporal Guard I only really use when I'm trying to bait out enemies, make them think I'm running in one direction, then use Temporal Guard and run the other way. This is really useful if you have, say, 10-20 people chasing you down and you want to split them up into 2 groups. You run in one direction, cast Temporal Guard, run the opposite direction, and then they are spread out and you can start killing them one by one. So it is quite effective to use in those scenarios, but it is mostly here on our bar just for the slotted minor protection on the back bar by having this skill exist on our bars. Next to our champion points, I'm going to go ahead and go over all of these trees really quickly. Feel free to pause the video on any of the trees you'd like to look at. As for the buffs we are using, this patch we are using the Lady Boon or Mundus, which increases our physical and spell resistance. We really benefit a lot out of this Mundus, even though it has been nerfed previously, just because it gives us that little bit of extra defenses we need because we're using a light armor build in a proc-oriented meta that we really want to be able to survive. We are using a Bewitched Sugar Skulls as our food. This basically is a Triostat golden food that gives us our max health, magicka, and stamina as much as possible, and in addition grants us that little bit of extra health recovery, which certainly helps with the buffs to Major Fortitude. The potions that we are using this patch are tri-stat potions. Basically, they just give us our health, magicka, and stamina, as well as major fortitude, major intellect, and major endurance, which all got buffed by 100% this patch. So they use 40% more regen rather than the 20% they used to give. So definitely recommended to use a tri-stat potion rather than the spell power potions that I was previously using. As for our race, I am currently playing as a Breton. You can certainly play this build with a Dark Elf if you like, but I would recommend running more Magicka through the enchantments or Mundus if you did. I think that Breton is a great race to use right now on Magicka builds because it allows you to sustain so much better, and that in combination with all the new effects for sustain that we've gotten this patch allows us to really live Magicka DK to its full potential, because the main limiting factor of the class has always been its terrible sustain. In this patch, I really feel like I can sustain it really well and be able to cast any abilities I want on demand whenever I need it, rather than be cheap with my Magicka and not heal myself on time or not buff up when I don't absolutely need it. So I definitely recommend playing Breton this patch. As for Vamprism, as I've mentioned earlier, I am not playing as a vampire and I do not recommend running it. I think that it ruins your sustain terribly whenever you play a vampire, even on just stage 1. The redone vampire skill line that ZeniMax has implemented in the Greymoor patch is something I really dislike. I do not like how Vamprism has become such a big pain point to use, and just for a few skills you have to sacrifice so much. So in my opinion, Vamprism is a big no-no for Magicka Dragoknights. I know a lot of people like using it, and I think it's certainly possible, but I do not recommend it for a playstyle like the one that I have and for my build specifically. Before we wrap up, I do want to mention about the Mythic item. You really can use any Mythic that you like on this build. This build is not dependent on Markarth because we don't use any proc sets or even heavy armor. If you'd like to replace Markarth with Wild Hunt like I did last patch, you certainly can. You are losing a little bit of potential damage, but you are benefiting from crits again, and you will have that extra mobility to survive well. You can use Pale Order Ring to get a lot of more healing power from your dots, but that will mean you're dealing a lot less damage. And keep in mind that Pale Order is bugged right now and does not give you the full heal value, and if you're fighting an opponent that uses shields, it gives you exactly 0 healing back, so keep that in mind. And if you don't want to run a Mythic piece at all, that is also possible. You can give up that one piece that I use for a Mythic item and the one piece that I use for trainee for a 2-piece of any kind. You can replace one of the jewelry pieces with a chest piece and use 2 jewelry for a willpower 2-piece, for example, or any kind of 2-piece you want, even a trainee 2-piece if you want to get that extra Magicka from it. Really, any way you want to go with. I think it'll still work. This build definitely does not depend on the Mythic, but it benefits a lot from it. So if you give it up, keep in mind that your damage will be lacking in comparison to using the Mythic, which is why I am using it now, even though I despise it and I think that it really ruins the diversity of this game. And that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button to see more content from me. I recently started doing content creation full-time, so your support is super relevant to me and I thank you for it. If you'd like to support my attempt at doing this full-time, I just started up a Patreon, so feel free to check it out. Link will be down below in the description. I also stream ESO 5 times a week, so check out my Twitch channel down below as well for live gameplay of this build and many others. And feel free to join my Discord server to stay in touch or ask any questions you might have. Link will be down below as well. Thank you again for watching this video. I appreciate you guys. Here is some gameplay of this build in action. Enjoy.